All right, class, let's get going with our next topic, which is the French Revolution. Essential question, how did the French Revolution change European politics forever? So the French Revolution was one of the large turning points in the entire European history. King Louis XV, 1715 to 1774, during his reign, nobility gained influence. Madame de Pompadour and ministers influenced the king, so the king wasn't very strong-willed and had a lot of outside influence. 1768, tried to subdue the judicial branch, and you know, at this time the monarchy still had a lot of power, if not absolute power, but they did have different branches of government, more to try people in courts and whatnot, so that was, but the king tried to subdue that judicial power. France was the most advanced country in Europe, had the largest population in the world, 25 million, was culturally dominated the continent, and the French was the official language throughout the continent. So the French were very powerful at the time. Now, at that time they had three estates. The first estate was the clergy. Less than 1% of the population, but owned 20% of the land. They were exempt from taxes, began to decline in 1789 due to the Enlightenment. And when I say decline, you know, slowly but surely their numbers started to decline, but they still had a tremendous amount of power. The second estate is the nobility. 2 to 4% of the population owned 25% of the land. They had increased since King Louis XIV. They could tax peasants on their own land, so the nobility, all they wanted to do was just make money. Then we had the third estate, which were a few rich middle-class people, the middle class themselves, the bourgeoisie, unskilled workers, and then all the peasants. They got taxed heavily. So remember, the first estate and the second estate did not have to pay any taxes. It was the third estate that paid the tax and paid for all of the nobility and what the clergy enjoyed. Oftentimes, some of the third estate would have to pay land tax, church tax, income tax, poll tax, salt tax, and taxes to feudal lords. So they got taxed very heavily. The bourgeoisie demanded political and social power to match the growing economic power. They resented the first and second estates, as I think I would if I was being taxed by the first and second estate. All right, now causes of the French Revolution. We got quite a few here. Soldiers serving in the American Revolution took ideas home. They saw when they were fighting against the British during, and a lot of times it was the Navy, but there were often, there were certain circumstances where there were French troops on American soil, and they took back ideas. The debt from the war hurt the economy in France. The Enlightenment ideas were against absolute monarchy. The three estates did not represent the people, which is, you know, about 90%. During King Louis XVI, he nearly bankrupted the entire country. Half of the annual budget went for payment on interest. And they had like a bylaw that the kingdom could not default on loans to banks. France had no bank or paper currency. The only way to get more money was to increase taxes. King tried to require nobles to pay taxes. They refused, and any new taxes had to be approved by the Estates General. King calls for the Estates General in May of 1789. So the king knew that he was in a dire position. He knew that he had to call the Estates General to get more money for taxes, but knew that this was not going to go over well. Calls in the Estates General, only met twice. Once in 1302, the other time in 1614. The Estates General was told to bring suggestions and or grievances to the big meeting. Now, the main issue dividing the Estates General was how to vote. The first and second estate had the same rights as the third estate, even though the third estate made up 90% of the people. So during this voting session or voting sessions, it was very clear that the first and second estate could easily outvote the third estate, you know, 2 to 1 almost every single time, because it was not a true representative government. You know, it was a situation where the first and second estate could simply outvote them every time. When called to vote in May 5th, 1789, the third estate refused and deadlocked for 6 weeks. Now, the French Revolution really started going, the age of Montesquieu. Montesquieu is a French philosopher that really spoke against the monarchy. And then you have the National Assembly. On June 17th, so just a few weeks later, 1789, the Third Estate declares itself the true National Assembly, locked out by the King Louis XVI. So the king says, you know what, Third Estate, I'm tired of you, I'm tired of your complaining, I'm just going to lock you out. So then they decide to meet at the tennis court and take an oath to stick together until a constitution is written, and that's the tennis court oath. The Third Estate assumed a sovereign power over the king. Well, as you can imagine, this didn't go over too well with the king. He started calling up the troops and getting things fired up. King dissolves the Estates General after many from the First and Second Estate go to National Assembly. The National Assembly was finally recognized by the king on June 27th. So we've got, a time frame going here from May to June and then the end of June. Now, storming the Bastille took place on July 14th, 1789. That was a huge event in French history. The Bastille was an old French prison that didn't have too many prisoners there at that time, but in the past it held many, many prisoners. And, it was more like some kind of model or something that they wanted to go against due to the fact that it represented all the tyrannical, forces that the absolute monarchy had held in the past. Now, the storming of the Bastille, some of the causes, the Parisians, or people from Paris, response to food shortage, increase in bread price, 25% unemployment, the call out of the military. So all of these things got the Parisians thinking, we got to, do something here. Let's have an uprising. Let's storm the Bastille. A great mob attacks the Bastille. It was an old prison looking for gunpowder and weapons. Only a few prisoners were actually there. They freed them, and then they killed the guards. They took the captain of the guard. They chopped his head off, put it on a pike, ran around the city screaming. So the storming of the Bastille was more of a symbolic gesture, but they really stormed the Bastille, and then they took their pickaxes to it and they razed the Bastille down to the ground. The Great Fear of 1789. Spirit of the rebellion spreads to countryside. Peasants attack their manor houses. August 4th, 1789, they voted to abolish feudalism, equal taxes for all classes. Peasants and middle class form a militia, and many, many people are killed. Thus the name, the Great Fear of 1789, at the end of the summer. Now, the Declaration of the Rights of Man on August 26, 1789, a constitution for the blueprint for France is finally written. Natural rights, freedoms, separate powers, everyone pays taxes. These things were all written in the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Some say it was modeled after the Constitution of the United States. Nevertheless, it had a lot of the things that were, the buzzwords going around at the time. Women did not gain many rights during this time. Olympia de Gouges writes The Rights of Women. 17 articles applied to women in 1791. And that's a great primary source to take a look at. Now, women march on the Versailles in October of 1789. So in the fall, the women get all fired up. There were bread shortages, and the writings of Marat incite 7,000 women to march on Versailles. So Versailles is about 12 miles out of Paris. The women march there. The queen hears that they're coming, gets kind of scared. Queen barely escapes, and she literally has to go out the back door as the guards are trying to fend them off. The guards all get killed. King and queen are then forced to move to Paris, as well as the National Assembly. Bread was available then to all the masses. So this is, at a time when, these bread shortages, women are seeing their kids starve to death, they went a little nutso. The king's power was greatly reduced to just a veto in the National Assembly. A famous statement by the Queen, and it's not sure if this is actual statement, but some say the Queen at this time when there was a bread shortage was quoted as saying, "If they don't have bread, then let them eat cake." Now, more than likely, this isn't a true statement. Did the Queen really say this? But it is an example of how this nobility and the clergy, things at that time to them didn't matter. The things that matter to the Third Estate, like having enough bread to feed your kids, or being employed. The nobility and the clergy were so out of touch with the Third Estate and with what the normal or the people needed that this is a quote that's been attributed to Queen Marie Antoinette, but it's not necessarily true. Nevertheless, history is no mystery. Take good notes.